WN Bank, a relentless commitment to being the best at everything they do, as well as our friends at Cole Roofing. Don't let it goof on your roof. You got a commercial roof space. Had the wind, we had the rain, and now you're about to get the heat. You need Cole Roofing and our friends at Pfister Energy. Luke Jones joins us now to discuss what was a shocking Thursday evening set of developments well after 11 o'clock. Luke, a lot of folks went to bed after the Ravens traded back from 16 to 22 and 22 to 25 to take the next Todd Heap or the next, tight end, and thinking, oh, all right, they got a nice little piece for Flacco. We'll get back after it tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Didn't work out that way for the old WNST text brought to you by Coons Ford, did it?
No, it didn't. And in the process, if you did go to sleep and if you were waking up to the WNST.net text, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford, you found out the Ravens are on the verge of changing course of their organization. They take Lamar Jackson. They trade back up into the first round, 32nd overall, and they take the quarterback from Louisville, former Heisman Trophy winner. And we talked about this a couple days ago. I think both of us were of the opinion that we'll believe it when we see it, and certainly I put forth my case at WNST.net why I was against.
Dude, if Eric DeCosta would have texted me and told me he was doing it, I wouldn't have believed him.
Yeah.
I literally, I just would never have believed that there. As a matter of fact, I almost threw him a text kidding around with him about it. Mm-hmm. I refrained, but I did find an old picture that I think you saw me share of him and Phil Savage and Ozzie Newsome 20 years ago, literally the Peter Boulware draft, 21 years ago. And I'm kind of blown away but they're clearly in love with Lamar Jackson, right? Like that, we always say, we find out who Ozzie loves on draft night. Ozzie did not love DJ Moore. He had a chance for Ozzie didn't love O.J. Howard last year. They had their sights set on this kid, this tight end. This is the kid they wanted. I thought they wanted the center from Iowa, strangely enough. I thought that's where they were going to go with this thing, but I never ever would have believed if you would have – what odds would you have given in Vegas that they were going to take a quarterback in the first round? Would you have made 15, 20 to 1? Where would you put it?
I'm not much of a bettor, but I certainly wasn't buying it. I certainly wasn't – certainly when Mike Mayock and Albert Breer and individuals that are pretty well sourced around the league and they know lots of people and they started talking about it, I started taking the possibility more seriously than I was, say, 2 months ago. But I still didn't think the Ravens were in a position where, they're moving on from Joe Flacco. It's not going to be this year, but I've heard a lot of people, and John Harbaugh took exception even to me using the expression, the writing's on the wall, which you took a quarterback with the first-round pick. You didn't draft this kid to be a backup. Maybe Joe Flacco plays lights out and you stick with him one more year after this year, but it's very clear this team drafted Lamar Jackson to replace Joe Flacco. Let's call it what it is.
Well, part of it is they're not going to pay Joe Flacco $25 million to be mediocre in 2020, or maybe not even in 19, right? So we'll see how he is in 18, but that would be the real rub on him, is that it's not that he sucks, it's he's too expensive, for what he is at this point, if you don't believe you can win with him. I don't know that it's an indictment that they don't think they can win with him this year. I think the oh, really? Okay, you think he's going to get on the field this year?
Nestor, you're the biggest Joe Flacco guy in the world. Let's call this what it is. They're making Joe Flacco the scapegoat here. If the last 5 years where they've been mediocre and they haven't made it to the playoffs more than once, and we've talked about this over and over. The people in town who want to just blame Flacco for all that, you got your wish. He's going to be gone after this year, most likely. Either he's going to be cut or they're going to trade him like the Kansas City Chiefs did Alex Smith this past year or this past offseason. So, let's call it what it is. The Ravens, they spent a lot of time during the press conference after day one was over talking about how they feel like they have another great quarterback and a playmaker. Well, you know what? If you maybe focused on getting more playmakers on the offensive side of the ball over the last 5 years, maybe you wouldn't have been in a position where you felt like, well, let's dump Joe Flacco. So, look, you and I have talked about this. Okay, they've added Michael Crabtree. They've added John Brown. They've added Willie Snead. If you think that makes them, ready to be more of a playoff contender than they were the last couple of years. I mean, okay, but I mean, if you're in win now mode, I don't see how you have your cake and eat it too here. I think doing this makes the short term for this football team very messy, because you know what's going to happen the first time Joe Flacco throws an interception or the first time this offense struggles.
Lamar Jackson became the most popular man in Baltimore at 11:42 on Thursday night, right?
Sure. And let me be very clear, and I was clear about this when I wrote this at WNST.net, how I was basically, my preemptive strike about this happening. I actually do like Lamar Jackson. That part of it, as far as in isolation, I'm really excited to watch him play. That said, does this regime really deserve to reboot at quarterback as quickly as they are when you consider how poorly they built around Flacco over the last 4 to 5 years? That's my big rub here. I mean, this really, to me, comes across as you've made Joe Flacco the scapegoat. And they're not going to like hearing that characterization, but I think it's the truth, because you can talk about all of his shortcomings as much as you want, but I'll point to Ozzie Newsome. 4 out of 17 day 1 and day 2 picks over the last 5 drafts going into this one were offensive players. 13 defensive players out of 17 picks in the first, second, and third round.
Plus the money.
Look at the money. Overthecap.com put out a tweet the other night. The Ravens have spent less non-quarterback money on their offense than any team in the NFL. I mean, if we're going to point to Joe Flacco and his shortcomings, and believe me, I'm not a Flacco apologist. There have been plenty of times I've said he's needed to play better, but let's also acknowledge that this same regime that is now deciding that they're replacing him with Lamar Jackson at some point here in the near future. It's not going to be 2018 necessarily, although, again, if you get off to a 3-5 start, I would think you're going to go to Lamar Jackson. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't, especially if Flacco's not playing at a noticeably higher level. So if you're going to point out his shortcomings, I just think it's fair to point out the shortcomings of the organization in doing a lousy job building around him. And, as long as we get that out of the way, I think the next question is, how quickly is Lamar Jackson ready to play? How quickly are you ready to truly turn the page and not just see if he can do the job? And believe me, there's questions about this. I mean, there's a reason why he fell to 32nd, even if he ends up being a great quarterback. This wasn't the slam dunk best quarterback in the draft. So there's questions there. And again, in the meantime, you have Flacco with the big cap number this year. Assuming you're going to move on from him next year in some capacity, it's going to be $16 million in dead money. No matter how you try to parcel that out, whether it's a post-June 1st or you try to take the hit all at once, that's going to severely impact their ability to build a roster next year. So I hear what they're trying to say as far as trying to win now, but if you're truly trying to win now, you're not taking a first-round pick on a guy that, under that scenario is not going to see the field in 2018. So I just think it's messy in the short term, and I'll say what I tweeted immediately in the moments after they drafted Lamar Jackson on Thursday night. I hope the Baltimore Ravens do a heck of a lot better job building a football team, building an offense around him than they did Flacco over the last 5 years.
He is Luke Jones with some very outspoken words about Joe Flacco as well as Lamar Jackson. Luke, I guess there's a million ways to slice this thing, and we haven't talked about Hayden Hurst, and we'll get to him in a couple of minutes, but can we discuss the trade value of all of this and what led to this? Because I am thinking that 20, 30, 50% of the Ravens fans turned it in at 11:15 and said, that's it. 28th players on the clock now. I see who they've drafted. They've taken a tight end. I'm going to bed. I got to get up at 6 in the morning. And they pop on NST in the morning or pop on their text or open their phone or open their Facebook or wherever in the world they found out. But I'm having a vibe, and I certainly felt that way on Twitter after it happened because there was no massive explosion, really, on the Lamar Jackson thing, the way there might have been had he been drafted at 8:30 at night. People went into the night not knowing about this. Run me through picks and run me through what's been given away because I think there is a. How did we wind up with 2 first-round draft picks? I mean, the Ravens are the story of the draft. If they get 2 first-round draft picks, they managed to finagle it all out, and it really did come back to how good Ozzie is at doing this and researching this, so that when they get on the clock, I mean, hell, the Raiders, the kid didn't even go up to the podium, and you heard it on NFL Network. Baltimore's traded the pick, like.
Right.
I mean, I heard it, and I'm like, well, I mean, that's no shocker there. You and I had talked about trades, but no one puts – I mean, one of the things about Lamar Jackson, you can criticize it. You can criticize Ozzie, Eric, the brass, John, whatever, but the next 5 years we're going to judge Lamar Jackson, and then you're going to say, well, how did he wind up here? You know, kind of like how did Jamal Lewis wind up here with the 4th overall pick the year before when Ozzie made the deal on the clock with the Falcons and Jamal Anderson, turned his knee up? I thought Ozzie did a pretty nice job to wind up with 2 first-round draft picks in this thing and wind up with more draft collateral and wind up with clearly 2 players they like, right? These were the guys they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, as far as my philosophical difference in doing this, and again, a lot of this is what's led to this moment more so than Lamar Jackson himself. As I've said, I like him as a player. I have my doubts if Marty Morningwig is going to develop him. I mean, suddenly, we're pointing to Marty Morningwig and saying, "Oh, look what he did with Michael Vick 8 years ago." Well, that was 8 years ago. So, but that aside, the actual deals themselves, I thought the Ravens got fine value with trading back the 2 times that they did prior to selecting Hayden Hurst, who is the forgotten man in all of this.
Right,
and
exactly.
We'll get to him at some point, but look.
It was like the year they drafted Suggs and Bowler. Nobody talked about Suggs.
Exactly. And which move lost Brian Billick his job? It was Kyle Bowler, ultimately. So, but I think when you look at what the Ravens gave up to get to the 32nd pick, they traded their 2nd-round pick, which was 52nd overall, and their 4th rounder, which, the 4th rounder was kind of insignificant because they got the Eagles' 4th rounder. They got the Eagles' 32nd pick. So really, when you look at this, it's as though the Ravens got to use their 2nd-round pick earlier. They basically moved up there. So it's as though they got to take their 2nd-round pick with the final pick of the 1st round, but they're also sending their 2nd-round pick next year to the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's the big piece that they gave up here to move up. As far as that value and that trade in and of itself, I think that checks out okay.
Well, if the kid's good, if the kid's Deshaun Watson-esque in some way, right? If the kid's good enough to help them win 10 or 11 games, which is all Flacco's good enough to do at this point probably, right? Then you would say if 2 years from now they never go into that dip where they have to pick 6th or 4th or 3rd to get a quarterback who's now an incoming freshman at Fresno State or whatever, right? Like, I can check off on this if they can have a quarterback transition without going off the cliff. This would be the year where they would go off the cliff, though, right? Like, this would be the year you would say, well, we don't think our quarterback's good enough, and we didn't get him another playmaker, and, Suggs is headed to the hall of wherever he's headed, and Weddle's halfway out the door, and, I'm trying to think of other aging players around here, guys that won't be around anymore. C.J. Mosley's a guy where they'll have to figure out to give him money or not give him money if they want to keep him around. But it does say that John Harbaugh's kind of married to Lamar Jackson too, right? And it just was a hell of a decision all the way around. I mean, and the deftness which with it happened, if they wind up getting a real quarterback that they believe in Lamar Jackson. They went all in, right? And now they've gone all in on a quarterback battle, as you've pointed out. They've, the black-white thing, I'm sure is going to, it's Baltimore. Why wouldn't that come into play here as well? That's going to happen before it's all over with here, too. And they've opened all of that up, all right? And now what happens this year? How does Flacco respond to this? What would they have to pay him if he goes out and looks like Joe Flacco this year? They've now... And what happens to Harbaugh, if they go 6-10 this year and things don't go well? And then what are they going to hire the next coach and say, here's your quarterback? I don't. It really is. I'd love to know what Steve Bisciotti thinks of this. Can we have a Steve Bisciotti press conference next week? That's where I would, because he's going to be the last guy standing. We already know Ozzy's not going to be really working here next year. Eric is allegedly going to be running the place, and I have no reason to believe he won't be. But I do wonder. I guess Lamar Jackson will be here. Joe Flacco will allegedly still be here, right? Or are you convinced that he absolutely becomes the cut here? Probably part of that is they try Lamar Jackson on it, running scout team and running around and seeing how he looks at practice and see how he looks in general before they have to get rid of Flacco. And in the end, they really only gave up a second-round draft pick and moved back 9 spots, right? Kind of, sort of.